Welcome, everyone. Good to be back. It's been a minute.
Back.
I missed you all.
Did you really?
I miss doing this. This is although I'm not in my usual spot, if the viewers could tell, it's throwing me.
Musical chair.
It ain't as colorful behind you.
That's right.
Reverse.
The real reason is I just wanted the Africa background and back.
Come on. You came clean. Oh, I'm so proud of you.
I had America in the back of me for a while, and I just wanted to go to Africa. Shout out to Chad. Shout out to Nigeria. Shout out to
all the people.
Cape Town. What up? You know,
Cape Town's a city, but you know what I'm saying.
it's, you know what I mean. It's on the continent. You
But
feel what I'm
Sudan's
saying? Shout out to Sudan,
Ethiopia.
I mean Ethiopia,
The DRC.
Yes. Yeah, Uganda. What up?
Well, good to be back. Good to be back with the Preaching Collective, and this time around we are going to be taking some time to go through certain elements of the Roosevelt Statement of Faith. And so our Statement of Faith is, I want to say, like 13, 14 paragraphs.
About 13 paragraphs. Yeah. Yep.
You can find it on our website, rooseveltchurch.org. And as many of you know who watch this, we use the Preaching Collective as an opportunity to think through things that we're going to be preaching through at Roosevelt Community Church. And this summer, we're going to be going through our Statement of Faith. Each paragraph will get a week this summer. And the idea, practically speaking, the Statement of Faith sort of works well for a summer series. Kind of a summer series is an overall theme, and each one can stand on its own as people are in and out over the course of the summer. But also, I thought many people are aware that we have a Statement of Faith, but don't know what's actually in it.
Yeah.
Every church should have a Statement of Faith. It's important. It speaks to what you believe, but it's not just there as something just to have on your website. It actually represents, here's some foundational things. Here's some things that are foundational to our faith. And because they're foundational to faith, these are things that influence our practice.
Yeah.
So if there's anything I sort of want to help people see, is that some of these things that we talk about believing in God and being a triune God, for example, believing that we're made in the image of God, believing this concept called the church, these sort of things that we sometimes take for granted. Here's what they are. Here's what we mean by those words. When we use a word like church or the gospel or the kingdom of God. And as you see what we mean by those words, here then are some of the ways that then influences our practice as a church and the ways that we live and act.
Ramon mentioned too, like it's on the website. And I just want to give a quick shout out because the website is super dope. So shout out to Doug. You know what I mean?
Doug Pinnick.
Doug Pinnick, man. He did our website. So you can go there.
Thanks for doing that up for us.
Yeah, you can find it there. You should also say too that we're not going to do all 13 in this Preaching Collective, right?
So we just pulled out a few that we thought would be cool for us to talk about here in this setting.
Let's do it.
So first one is a big one, humanity. And so if you it's a whole paragraph. We're not going to read the whole paragraph here as part of Preaching Collective. Check out the website. But if I could sum up the paragraph, the big belief here is that we were made in the image of God.
Right.
And the significance of the fact that we're made in the image of God and put on this earth by God. Genesis 1:26-28 is maybe one of the passages that's behind the whole multi-sentence paragraph that you have in our Statement of Faith on humanity. It's worth reading this. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let him have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. This is one of the. There's a lot of things I like about Christianity. Here's one of the ones that should get more play, more understanding of how significant this is and how influential this is.
I'm a bit surprised that it doesn't. I'm just like,
still surprised. Here are your guys' thoughts. The fact that we are the uniqueness of the fact, the importance of the fact that the Bible says we are made in the image of God. You guys' thoughts on that?
Tons of thoughts.
I was gonna run in there and jump in. I was like, man, should I just...
Right.
Well, it doesn't say it once. I would say that first. It's not. I'm surprised from the jump that man was made in the image of God isn't. There's a sense that it gets underplayed, like it's a foundational verse. Yeah. And so, and it's not only that, but if you follow the narrative of Scripture, I feel like the image of God is like a scarlet thread, where in the beginning, God makes man in his likeness and his image. In Romans, that sort of like constitutional book that we all try to, it says that for those whom he foreknew, he predestined to be conformed into the image of his son. That image of his son, Christ, he talks about him being the image of the invisible God. In Hebrews, the exact representation, almost like a coin, like Jesus is like God in like physical, like the same way that it's not exact. When Jesus was like looking at the coin when they're like, should your disciples pay taxes? And he was like, whose image is this? In the similar fashion, he's like, whose image is it? In Hebrews, it's the same picture where it's like he's the exact imprint. So I'm like, God said, okay, if you want me, Jesus, right? And then in the end, John talks about we do not know what will yet be, but we know we'll be like him because we'll see him as he is.
Yeah.
So I feel like from the beginning to the end, it's talking about the image of God, right?
Yeah.
And over, it's saying like more and more you're going to be conformed into this image until the day that we get to be with Jesus and stand with God in eternity. And I go, that gets underplayed? That's wild to me.
Right,
I'm like,
right.
that's the whole book. You know what I mean? Like, we groan for the redemption of our bodies, like the full, complete finishing of the image being formed in us. I'm like, that gets like.
Anyways, why do you guys think that it gets downplayed?
Well, maybe downplayed is not the right word. Maybe it's just people easily, given some of the things people say about other people or the way we treat one another, it's like we easily forget it, overlook it, and misunderstand how like vital that is. I mean, it's even starting from the perspective of when this is written, right, in the culture of that day, that idea that human beings reflect God or made in his image is radical. Like you look at any of the ancient mythological stories, that's not how they talk about human beings. They talk about them being made as like the playthings of the gods, right? So they're just to serve the gods' whims, right? The gods in the ancient mythologies come across like almost fraternity. Fraternities are like one of the worst fraternities or sororities you've ever seen. Like they're just partying, having sex, and enjoying themselves, and humanity is there just to serve their whims. Humanity is sort of made out of like nothing, right? And humanity is an afterthought to the gods,
right?
And here we have from the first chapter of the Bible. No, human beings are made to reflect God Himself, are made in His image and valued as such. If you really capture that, it really then says like some of the ways we might immediately think or talk about people, like we would never think or talk about people that way. Some of the ways in which we've allowed mistreatment of people, we would immediately recoil against.
One thing about the image of God that you mentioned the word reflect, and I think about the idea of like we're created with the capacity to have relationship with God, right? The idea that God Almighty, the one God that eternally exists in three divine persons, is in itself a community. There's a intertrinitarian relationship that is with the Father.
Intertrinitarian. Yo, write that down. You know what I'm saying? Go look that up.
The Phoenix Seminary in the house. Wow, there it is right there. Systematic Theology 101.
Quoting them things. Intertrinitarian. How many syllables is that? Intertrinitarian. Boy, 7 syllables. But you out here cutting up. Okay.
So yeah, man. So like there's an intertrinitarian relationship. And because we're made in image and likeness of God, human beings, that is, we're made for relationship. So boom, I have that in my mind. Also think of the aspect of this idea of responsibility. There's a responsibility that image bearers have. And some of these stuff we see here, like be fruitful and multiply, to have dominion. I know some people are very scared of that dominion language, but it's in the Bible, right? We're called to be stewards and managers over what God has given us. And so there's a responsibility that I think we have in the world that is our Father's world, right? And then also, the reflect part that you mentioned, I think is also, when we think about the attributes of God, His character, We want to represent and reflect that character and all throughout, right? So this image of God thing, yes, is foundational. Yes, it should not be downplayed. But I would also say, you know, since we're at Roosevelt, we're going to make sure it doesn't get downplayed. We're going to make sure that it gets showcased, because this doctrine was the foundation for the civil rights movement.
You just took it there. You like,
I mean,
you hit that exit real quick.
I'm just
like,
saying, we're going to keep it a tall. Like, this is what it was. Like,
No, that's
it was
facts.
because, you know what I'm saying? So I just think that those are the things I think about when you mention the image of God.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting into some of the ways that practically reflects itself. I mean, you saying that, I think of it's a well-known image of people walking around during the civil rights movement saying, I am a man. Right? Am I a man? I think it was, am I a man?
Am I a man?
Am I a man? And what's behind that? It's that sense of, and so imagine sort of black men walking around with that sign and protest, am I a man, is to say, like, black men are legitimately human beings, right? They're men, right?
They're not 3/5.
They're not 3/5. But this is like during Jim Crow, right? So like technically that gone away, and yet they're still being treated as less than, right?
Right.
You're you're part of American society. We're not enslaving you anymore. However, not quite. You're a man, but not quite as much of a man as a white man. And that was that statement. Am I a man? I think comes out of the biblical ethic that we're all made in the image of God, equally known, equally valued. So again, if we understand that concept, that doctrine, again, as explained in our statement of faith, it makes you then begin to see like the ways in which our society looks differently at different segments of people, whether it's people of different races, ethnicities, the ways in which people look differently about men versus women, the way we view the elderly, the way we view the preborn, the way we view the quote unquote illegal immigrant, right? There's any range of places where, because of sin, we sort of have fallen away and begun to sort of segmentize different segments of our population, and implicitly or explicitly say they're less than. Right?
Yeah.
They're not. I'm more human than you. And from the first chapter of the Bible, like, we see like that is not how God created this world. Sin makes us act in ways less than that. This doctrine helps us reclaim that.
Yeah, I was gonna add one of the ways that we avoid this question is that very reason. We like to put people in the category, like I hear this all the time, they're animals and they're this, and it kind of removes us from that category of like, you're human. So if I view you as an animal, then I can treat you as an animal.
Right.
And a lot of us don't know how to like fully unpack this as well. Like, what is the image of God? Is it the hands, the feet? Is it this and that? And it's complex, but like you're saying, we are in the image of God, and we never lose that, regardless if we're in Christ or if we're out of Christ. Like, we still hold the Imago Dei, regardless. And so
you saying no matter if you're a Christian, if you're Hindu, if you're Muslim, if you're Buddhist, no matter what you are, because
if you're atheist, we still hold the image of God. We are image bearers of God. And from that point, just from the human standpoint, we need to respect one another. We need to to care for one another, and we are not exempt from mistreating God's creation, regardless of what we feel. Regardless of how we feel people should act or whatever. So.
It's interesting to me. I mean, I was going to ask the question, like, why is it important to have a statement of faith? Because both of you mentioned, you were talking about the statement of faith, but then you were talking about this doctrine. And doctrine is this sort of academic term. It's not really a term you hear. You don't walk around every day and be like, yo, man, what's your doctrine? Like, you don't talk, people don't normally talk like that. So even, talking a little bit about what doctrine is and where that word comes from, or at least what the word means, which gets really to like why words are so important. Because sometimes it feels like, and people will do this, they'll try to, you get into certain conversations and maybe it's appropriate sometimes. But you get to a certain place in the conversation, people are like, oh, you're just arguing semantics. And I'm like, well, you're always arguing semantics, and semantics are important because words are important. And it's not just Bible, but it's just communication in general. And I think sometimes we lose the fact of how important the words we use are and then how that informs how we act.
Well, if I could speak to that a little bit, I mean, you're right in one sense that, yeah, people don't go around just saying, yo, what's your doctrine, bro? What your doctrine says. We don't talk like that. But I would argue that in one sense, it's just saying what you believe. And I would argue that even though we don't use the term doctrine on the street level, everybody's making doctrinal statements. For instance, just God, right?
Yep.
Crystal's shirt that she have on right now, like that's that's a doctrinal statement from what she's just wearing. She's not verbally saying it, but what she wears, Nike, just do it. That's a doctrinal statement. When we think about cultural artifacts, you know, I was recently listening to Kanye West's, Ye's album, Jesus is King. The name of that album is a doctrinal statement, right? So we can take it anywhere from the marketplace to whatever. Everybody has doctrine. Everyone has beliefs that they believe, whether they use that phrase or that word or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just don't know if it goes as far as people necessarily believing. I will say it is like Billboard. People are always saying something. And so doctrine in most places is a word for teaching. So like doctor of something, a doctor of ministry is like a teacher of, etc. And so just God is saying something. And when you say something in some degree, it's like you're almost educating, right? And I don't know if people believe everything they wear.
I think some people do.
Some people do.
Not everybody.
But some people just wear it because it looks cool. But they don't even realize, like, yo, still, if I say something, if you're reading this, it's already too late. I'm still saying something that people themselves are going to digest one way or another.
I would say,
and it might affect the way they believe.
Yeah, I just would say whether they believe it or not, it's still a doctrinal statement in some form or fashion. That's all I'm saying.
Sure.
Obviously, at least for believers, you know, the things that we say we want to believe and we should believe, and obviously that involves the way that we also practically live out too. So, but yeah, that's what I would at least kind of think through in terms of, you know, your question regarding doctrine.
There's a line in the statement of faith that if you hear your sort of guys' thoughts on this, because I think it sort of speaks into some of the things that even you talk a lot about this, James, just sort of tying in the fact that we're made in the image of God to then the work that we do and the creativity that we do. So it says that, you know, we're called as human beings to be caretakers in the cultivation of creation, living in holy and devoted fellowship with their Maker. Again, there's a lot to sort of tease out there, but that sense of that, one of the ways, so we talked about the value of human beings because we're made in the image of God from, as we say, from womb to tomb, right? Thank you. And everything, all that. But also then, because it's not just that we have value because we're made in the image of God, but also in how God has uniquely placed us in the creation. He placed us above all the other animals, above all the other things, right? Placed us in unique space, right? With a role more significant than an angel's, arguably, right? So that God has placed us in this earth to cultivate it, right? To steward it, to nurture it, in connection to Him, right? And so, you know, obviously, when we sort of, the farther away we move away from what's good and true and right and all those things, then I think we're farther away from using the creation in ways that God intended to. But then when we move more towards those things, we use the creation in the ways that we want to. So there's a balance here of, like, on one end saying, okay, it's bad for us to steward the creation, to cultivate it. On the other end, for us to then say, well, there's right ways to do it, that we shouldn't abuse the world that we have, or we shouldn't neglect the work that we're called to do. That all those things fit together in keeping with the calling that we have as human beings made by God.
Oh yeah, completely. I think there's a significance in the fact that we're made in the image of God, and people need to know that. But that also means that the things that we make have an opportunity to showcase God's image and what God is like. Yeah. I think people miss that. Yeah, and so if people don't, that's good. There's often a situation with, like, people's confidence because they, for whatever reason, right? And I think, you know, trauma is a real thing, and, you know, sin is real. And so People grow up in the messages that they hear. Again, the words that are used in the environments that people are raised in, and those messages lead them down paths that are not paths of righteousness, we'll say, right? But the thing that I feel like universally should really, if there's anything that should establish anyone's self-esteem, it's that reality that I am made in the image of God. And that gives me the opportunity to make things to show people what God is like. And if just that becomes the thing, now I get to study God to see all the different things that he's done, right? And all the different ways that he has interacted and had relationship. Like, he's made himself available. God has, and it's kind of a wild thing. So, when God talks to the people of Israel and says, the name of the Lord is blasphemed amongst the Gentiles because of you, because God tied his image and his reputation to our behavior. So when people do go and abuse and do all these things under his name, he's like, yo, I get a bad rep because of you. And rightly so, he would judge them and say, you need to get your act together, right? I don't want your sacrifices. I don't want your tithing. I don't want any of that until you treat the poor right, until you treat people right, until you do the things that actually reflect what I'm like.
Right.
The works of your hands, the things that you make, show people what I look like, right? That's why he sends Jesus. You get the perfect representation of him. And so I feel like there's such an opportunity for people who wrestle with the confidence problem, right? Because it's not a situation of like, oh, you're just talented. It ain't just that. It's like, oh, you got skills. It's not just that. Yeah. It's saying foundationally, you were made in the image of the Almighty God. Yeah. Because of that, now when you look at your life and go, man, there's this unique thing that I'm able to do a little bit better than anybody else I know. I go, yeah, do that thing because God gave that to you so that through that, people might be able to see him. Right. And that, in some people's minds, is the definition of the glory of God, to make him seen. So do that work. Like, I'm like, anyways, so I do get on soapboxes, but I'm like, that's, if there's anything underplayed, it's definitely that. I'm like, yo,
that's good.
Like, that's a thing people need to understand for sure.
I think to piggyback off the confidence thing, I just think about the different people that, talk about the different messages that people have gotten either from the culture, from social media, from their parents, from the neighborhood, from the block, from the hood that they grew up on, whatever.
Schools, teachers.
You ain't nothing, never gonna be nothing, like that type of stuff, And I can't help but think about, just when we're trying to share the gospel with people, share the good news of salvation, to me is important to, a lot of times I think we start at Genesis 3.
We do.
We start with the fact of you're dead, you're a sinner, you're going to hell.
And then try to use that trauma like that.
Yeah, you start at Genesis 3 almost to just, which, sure, that could be an approach if someone is more prideful and, you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
But sure. I think for some people, if you start at Genesis 1 and you just start out with God being the creator, and he created you in your image and likeness, that's a different approach. You're not compromising the gospel by starting there. In fact, you're giving a comprehensive picture of what the gospel actually is.
Sounds like whole counsel to me.
Right. You're preaching the whole counsel of God. So just starting that thing. And I mean, that might be something for you to kind of tease out too, Ramon, when you preach. Just like that idea of like, and you talk about seminaries and stuff like that. A lot of people are taught, educated to start at Genesis 3. So anyways, I say all that to say, I think there's approaches that we can,
for sure,
we can do that, and again, not saying that starting at Genesis 3 is inherently sinful or bad. If somebody, going back to what I was saying, they grew up in a very privileged environment, everything was good for them and they never, they always taught that they were good. You know what I mean? Yeah. Maybe starting at Genesis 3 for that individual, that might be good to the approach. And
sure.
So you got to understand your audience, I think, too. So
yeah, I can't help but I'm going to say just one last thing that I'm not going to say nothing else after this. I've said enough. But I grew up with sisters, so I have two sisters. Grew up around a lot of strong women, and so naturally there's going to be younger women, so younger sisters that are in the life. And one of the things. I'll confess, I've never really been a fan of street evangelism. I never liked passing out tracts or any. I didn't like it. So when I was in seminary, I was trying to find a different way of. I was like, evangelism is important, but I don't like the way I see it done. Like you trying to go to the club, stop somebody from going to the club. I was like, bro, that is so corny. Don't stop doing it. And so I was a photographer at the time, or at least I was like early in that photography journey. So I thought I would use the image of God and try to turn that place. So, but the thing that I noticed was it was so much easier to tell anybody you've got unique value, worth, dignity, and beauty, especially for young women who have self-image issues. Again, the image of God is it's such an easy like starting point, and you don't gotta like,
that's good.
You don't gotta fabricate nothing.
Absolutely.
You gotta go like, you don't understand whose image you've been made in.
Yep.
And so you could just go down that line, value, dignity, worth, beauty. Who does that not apply to?
Yeah.
You a basketball dude who think you can't do whatever, and you got this height and talent or whatever. It's like, yeah, there's a dignity and worth to that, whether you play or you don't, right? And the girls who are thinking they got to compare to this whatever and that whatever, it's like, yo, it doesn't have to be like that. That's and good. So I love the way the image of God it levels everyone.
Yeah, I mean, just real quickly, I mean, I think, were you saying something?
I was, but go ahead.
Well, real quickly, I was just going to say was that it's one of the things we didn't mention per se. Well, we sort of briefly touched on, but just the significance of women in that narrative, right? You want to take?
No, go.
Take it, Crystal. Take it.
Go for it, because I don't know what you're gonna say. But
well, I mean, just how the passage specifically wants to elevate women as being made in the image of God. That in fact, it mentions male and female being made in the image of God.
That's right.
Yeah.
That Adam is not complete until Eve is created. There's something really significant about the fact that we are gendered as a species, right? I think the significance of male-female marriage, right? It reflects something of who God is.
That's good. Yep.
And so it's just another way of just reminding us of the significance of women.
Yeah, I was just gonna highlight 27, like you said. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him, male and female. He created them.
Yeah.
Like when we're talking about words, it's like He's like male and female. We created them. Like that's so significant. It wasn't that He had one person in mind. It was both of them from the beginning. So
that's the full scope of the image of God.
That's good.